Welcome to The Vanishing Footsteps on Christmas Eve, a chilling Sherlock Holmes mystery where footprints appear, then vanish in the snow. What secret lies beneath the silence of that winter night? Stay close, and tell us, where are you listening from tonight? It was on the evening before Christmas, amid a thick white silence that lay heavy over London, when the strange affair of the vanishing footsteps first began. The snow had fallen steadily throughout the day, softening the city's edges and muting the usual cacophony of wheels and voices. From our window at Baker Street, I remember watching the gas lamps flicker like spectral eyes through the fog, their halos dimmed by the slow, relentless descent of flakes that coated the pavements and rooftops alike. Holmes sat cross-legged in his chair, an open violin case beside him, though the instrument itself rested untouched upon the table. He was staring, instead, at a telegram that had just been delivered, its creased edges betraying the urgency of the message. The faint crackle of the fire and the distant chiming of a church clock were the only sounds that disturbed the hush. "A case, Holmes?" I inquired, folding my newspaper and noting the gleam of interest that had returned to his keen grey eyes. "Indeed, Watson," said he, tapping the telegram with one long finger. "A most peculiar occurrence, sent from none other than Inspector Lestrade himself. It seems the good man has stumbled upon a situation in Hampstead that has baffled his entire division." He passed me the telegram. It read, "Urgent. Mysterious disappearance outside the home of Colonel Sir Reginald Bainbridge. Snow shows only one set of footprints, then none. No trace of struggle. Victim missing. Request your immediate assistance." Lestrade raised my brows. "Only one set of footprints and they vanish?" "Precisely," Holmes replied, rising abruptly and pacing toward the fire. "It is a problem after my own heart. The human mind delights in patterns, Watson, and when a pattern ceases, such as footsteps ending mid-snow, there lies the seed of true mystery." He donned his long grey overcoat, his movements brisk and deliberate. "Quickly, my dear fellow. The cab will be here in 5 minutes. Bring your revolver, there's no telling what shadows may linger behind this holiday cheer." Within the hour, we were rolling northward through the sleeping city. The streets glimmered beneath a crust of frost, and the horses' hooves clopped softly, leaving clear impressions that vanished almost as quickly beneath the new snowfall. The cab's windows misted from our breath, and I found myself thinking how London, under snow, became a different creature entirely, its filth and frenzy masked beneath a fragile purity. Holmes, meanwhile, sat deep in thought, his chin resting on his steepled fingers. "You recall, Watson," he murmured at last, "the curious case of the tracks at Dartmoor, where a man's print was found beside a creature's paw. This bears some kinship to that phenomenon, yet Lestrade's telegram hints at no second presence. I am eager to see what nature of illusion could so deceive the eye." When we arrived at Colonel Bainbridge's residence, a stately house perched along a quiet, tree-lined avenue, the hour was nearing 11. The iron gates stood open, and the yellow lamplight from within spilled weakly upon the snow-blanketed lawn. Lestrade himself awaited us at the door, his moustache bristling with frost. "Glad you came, Mr. Holmes. Never seen the like of it," he said, leading us inside. A man's vanished into thin air, right before his family's very eyes. We were shown into a drawing room where the colonel, a robust man of 60 with a face hardened by years of service, stood beside his trembling wife and a young woman whom I later learned was their daughter, Miss Clara Bainbridge. The girl's pale face bore the strain of sleeplessness and fear. "Mr. Holmes," said the colonel gruffly, "this business is beyond reason. My valet, James Corbin, was sent out not 2 hours ago to fetch a parcel from the gate. We watched from the window, saw his footprints plain as day across the snow. Then, halfway there, the prints simply ceased. The man never reached the gate, and there was no sign of his return." Holmes listened without interruption. "The snow was fresh, I take it?" "Fell all afternoon, sir. It's undisturbed except for those prints." "And there was no wind strong enough to drift or cover them?" "Not a breath," the colonel insisted. Holmes requested a lantern and asked to be shown the scene at once. We stepped out into the night, the cold biting through even my heaviest coat. The moon had emerged faintly through the cloud veil, casting a dim sheen upon the immaculate whiteness. "There," said Lestrade, pointing, "you can see them still." Indeed, there they were, crisp, solitary impressions leading from the porch down the path. I counted 17 before the trail abruptly ended. Beyond that point, the snow lay utterly pristine, smooth and unbroken as a blank page. Holmes crouched, holding the lantern low. He examined the last footprint with minute attention, brushing aside the loose flakes with his gloved hand. "Curious," he murmured. "The stride is even, the depth consistent, no sign of haste or misstep. Our man did not leap or stumble. He simply ceased to exist upon this spot." Lestrade shuddered slightly. "We searched every inch around here. No well, no hidden trapdoor. It's solid ground." Holmes glanced toward the nearby hedge, then to the roofline above. "Watson, note the branches there. See how they are bowed under the snow, yet unbroken. Nothing passed through them. And the air. Listen." I held my breath. There was nothing but the whisper of falling snow and, somewhere distant, the faint toll of midnight bells. Holmes straightened slowly. "Gentlemen, what we have here is not the work of the supernatural, though it may well appear so. Nature hides her clues beneath a layer of deception, and tonight she has used snow as her accomplice." He turned toward the colonel. "With your permission, I shall examine your servants' quarters. There may be an answer closer to the hearth than to the heavens." As we followed him back toward the warm light of the house, I saw that peculiar glint in Holmes's eyes, that quiet, razor-sharp excitement that told me the chase had begun. Whatever secret lay buried beneath that snow, I knew that before the dawn of Christmas morning, Sherlock Holmes would have unearthed it. Holmes moved through the Bainbridge residence like a hound following a hidden scent. His keen eyes missed nothing, the faint trace of melted snow on the tiles, the half-burnt log in the hearth, even the faint fragrance of lavender soap that hung incongruously in the air. The colonel's housekeeper, Mrs. Dane, led us down a narrow corridor to the servants' quarters at the rear. A single oil lamp flickered there, throwing long shadows that seemed to shiver upon the walls. "This was Corbin's room, sir," she said nervously, wringing her hands. He was a quiet sort, never gave trouble, always punctual, always neat. Why, his boots are still by the bed where he left them before going out. Holmes immediately stooped to examine them. "Unworn," he murmured. "And yet, the man went outside. Pray tell me, Mrs. Dane, did Corbin possess another pair?" "Yes, sir, an older pair. He said he'd wear those tonight because of the snow. They're gone from under the cot." Holmes nodded and continued his inspection. He opened a drawer, producing a small, crumpled envelope. Inside was a folded paper, smudged with grease. He held it under the lamp and smiled faintly. "Watson, observe our missing man had correspondence of a most curious kind." The paper bore a short message in hurried script. "Meet me by the yew gate at 10:30. Come alone. The matter concerns your master's past." "By Jove!" I exclaimed. "Then the poor fellow may have been lured into a trap." "Perhaps," Holmes said, slipping the paper into his pocket. "But consider the hour. It matches the time of his disappearance. Whoever sent this note either knew Corbin's habits intimately or was watching the house." We returned to the main hall, where Lestrade stood impatiently, stamping his feet to keep warm. "Find anything?" he asked. "Enough to whet the appetite," Holmes replied dryly. "Tell me, Lestrade, was the snow still falling when you arrived?" "It had just stopped," the inspector said. "We got here within 20 minutes of the alarm. My men searched every yard of the grounds. Nothing. Not even a mark past that last footprint." Holmes tapped his chin thoughtfully. "And yet you searched only outward, not upward." Lestrade frowned. "Upward, precisely." Holmes turned toward the door again, beckoning us to follow. Outside, the cold hit us like a slap. The moon now hung clearer, lending the landscape an eerie glow. Holmes paced to the final footprint and, to my astonishment, tilted his head toward the ivy that clung to the side of the house. "Look there, Watson. See the faint discoloration on those leaves." Snow brushed away roughly, and by something moving upward. I leaned closer. "Good heavens! Holmes, someone climbed the wall, or was pulled up it," he said softly. "The branches are strong enough to bear a man's weight, and the window above opens into, yes, the small storage loft. Lestrade, bring your lantern." We followed Holmes as he clambered up with surprising agility. The window yielded easily to his hand, and we entered a cramped attic smelling faintly of oil and dust. It was empty, save for a few crates and the remnants of a broken lantern. Holmes bent beside a dark patch on the floorboards and pressed his fingers into it. Oil, still tacky. A lantern overturned recently. And here, boot prints. The same tread as those in the snow below. Lestrade's eyes widened. Then Corbin was brought up here. Holmes said nothing but moved to a small door at the far end of the attic. It opened into a narrow servant's stairwell leading downward. He descended carefully, the boards creaking beneath us. At the bottom, we found ourselves behind the pantry, where the air was noticeably colder. A door to the outside stood ajar, its lock splintered. "Lestrade," Holmes said quietly. "Your men searched the grounds." "Yes, but they never checked this exit. Our man did not vanish at all. He was taken through the house, not away from it." Lestrade swore under his breath. "Then someone inside helped." Holmes's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Quite so. And the snow outside merely provided the illusion of disappearance. A clever ploy to distract us from the truth." He turned toward the hall, his eyes gleaming. "Watson, I fancy this household hides more than one ghost tonight. Let us see which of them still walks in flesh and blood." Holmes's eyes glimmered as he moved back toward the grand staircase, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. The household had settled into an uneasy quiet, though the tension beneath that silence was palpable. Colonel Bainbridge followed close behind, his boots echoing sharply on the marble, while Lestrade muttered to his constables in low, impatient tones. Holmes, however, seemed indifferent to all of it. He paused halfway up the stairs and looked thoughtfully at the portraits hanging along the landing ancestral faces, staring down in solemn disapproval. "Colonel," Holmes said suddenly, "you mentioned earlier that Corbin had been in your employ for some years." "8, Mr. Holmes. A better servant no man ever had. Devoted to the family, particularly to my daughter." Holmes's head tilted slightly. "Ah, devoted, you say. And was that affection, perhaps, mutual?" The colonel stiffened. "Clara is a gentle girl. She treats all beneath this roof with kindness, nothing more." Holmes's expression softened with a polite nod, though I could tell from the faint narrowing of his eyes that he had drawn a silent conclusion. "I see. Then it would be prudent to speak with Miss Bainbridge privately." "If you permit." The colonel hesitated, then sighed. "If you must, she's in the library." We found Miss Clara Bainbridge seated by the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as we entered, her face pale but composed. Holmes bowed slightly. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Bainbridge. I would not trouble you on Christmas Eve, were it not for the urgency of your servant's disappearance. I must ask, did you know of any reason he might venture out tonight, beyond ordinary duty?" Her eyes flickered. "No. None, Mr. Holmes. He was kind, loyal. He would never have left without telling me, without telling father." She hesitated, then looked down. Unless he was frightened." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Frightened, you say? Of what?" She twisted a small handkerchief in her fingers. "There were letters, Mr. Holmes. Strange ones. Corbin received them this past week. He burned them quickly. Said they were nonsense, but I saw one, just a glimpse. It bore our family crest on the seal." Holmes exchanged a swift glance with me. "Your crest? Then someone within your circle sought to draw him out tonight. Tell me, Miss Bainbridge, who else knew of Corbin's errand to the gate?" Only father, myself, and Mrs. Dane. Oh, and Mr. Godfrey. Mr. Godfrey? I repeated. My fiancé, she said quietly. He dined with us this evening. He left shortly before Corbin went missing. Holmes's fingers drummed once against his knee. And how well acquainted is Mr. Godfrey with your household staff? Barely at all. He treats them with courtesy, but he keeps his distance. He's proud. Pride and deceit often share a roof, Holmes murmured, rising from his chair. Thank you, Miss Bainbridge. You have been most helpful. As we stepped into the corridor, Lestrade joined us. Well, Holmes? Any progress? Progress, Inspector, is often invisible until the moment of revelation, Holmes replied. However, I should like to speak with Mr. Godfrey if he can be located. Already tried that, said Lestrade. He returned to his rooms near Regent's Park after dinner. Sent a message saying he'd heard about the servant's disappearance and hopes we'll keep him informed. Sounds innocent enough. Holmes's eyes glinted with quiet amusement. Ah, but innocence expressed too readily can be as revealing as guilt concealed. I think, Lestrade, that our next step is not to chase the ghost in the snow, but to follow the living shadow that cast it. He turned to me. Watson, do you recall the scent of lavender we noticed earlier? Distinctly. Then recall also that it lingered strongest in the corridor leading to Corbin's quarters, yet Mrs. Dane, the housekeeper, wears a markedly different perfume. It would appear someone handled Corbin's clothing before he left, or rather, before someone else wore them. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. You mean? Holmes nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Our missing man may not have left this house at all, Watson. But another, wearing his coat and boots, certainly did. Holmes's words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. The colonel stared at him, bewildered. Another man wearing Corbin's clothes? Impossible, sir. Everyone in this house was accounted for. Holmes gave a faint, knowing smile. So it would appear, Colonel. Yet deception thrives in what we call the accounted for. Tell me, who besides your servants had access to the back corridors tonight? The colonel frowned. No one, except perhaps Godfrey. He fetched his coat from the vestibule after dinner. Why? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Ah, just so. A moment, if you please. He strode toward the small cloakroom near the main entrance, and with Lestrade's lantern casting its pale glow across the hanging coats, he inspected each garment with silent precision. His fingers stopped at a heavy overcoat lined with grey fur. From its pocket, he produced a faintly stained handkerchief that bore a monogram, G. H. Godfrey Hales, Holmes murmured, and yet note the faint residue of lavender oil upon the fabric. The very scent from Corbin's quarters. Lestrade peered over his shoulder. You think he disguised himself as the servant? Holmes did not reply at once. He examined the coat's cuff with a magnifying glass, his brows knitting. Look here, fine threads torn loose, white fibers clinging to the seam. Wool from a housemaid's duster, perhaps. He dressed in haste. And this, he lifted a single dark hair from the collar, certainly not his own. Our Mr. Hales has been playing a dangerous masquerade. The colonel clenched his fists. If what you're implying is true, Holmes, then that man dined at my table and, good heavens, used my servant as part of his deceit. Holmes's tone remained calm, almost detached. So it seems. The question now is why? What motive would prompt such an elaborate performance? We followed him back toward the drawing room, where the dying fire threw shifting patterns of orange and shadow. Holmes stood motionless before it, lost in thought. Then, abruptly, he spoke. Lestrade, I require a list of everyone in this household, including temporary guests and dismissed servants. And, Colonel, has your family ever been the target of blackmail? The colonel hesitated. There was one incident many years ago, a letter demanding silence regarding my time in India, but the fellow was caught and imprisoned. Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. Indeed, And did this same matter concern another man, perhaps one named Hales? The colonel's face drained of color. By thunder, it did. Godfrey Hales's father. He served under me before the mutiny, a scoundrel, court-martialed for theft, but released under my testimony. He fled England soon after. Holmes smiled faintly. Then I fear the sins of the father may have returned upon the son. Tonight's charade suggests premeditation. Corbin's disappearance, the false footprints, the luring note, all designed to cast suspicion elsewhere, while Mr. Hales pursued his true aim. Lestrade leaned forward. Which is? Holmes gestured toward the ceiling. Patience, Inspector. The night is not yet done, and neither is our quarry. He turned briskly. Colonel, where does that attic stairway lead beyond the pantry? To the old wine cellar, the colonel said, bewildered. It hasn't been opened in years. Why? Because, Holmes interrupted, our impostor needed an exit that avoided both snow and witnesses. Watson, bring your revolver. We descended the narrow stair once more, our breath clouding in the damp air. The cellar door creaked open, releasing a chill draught. Holmes's lantern illuminated rows of dusty bottles and cobwebbed shelves. For a moment, nothing stirred until a faint rustle came from the far corner. Holmes raised a hand for silence. He moved forward slowly, every step deliberate. Then, with sudden speed, he swept the lantern upward, revealing a man crouched behind a cask, his face pale, his coat torn. It was Corbin. Good Lord! I gasped. He's alive! The servant blinked weakly, his voice trembling. Mr. Holmes, he tricked me, said Miss Clara was in danger, struck me down and locked me here. I tried to shout, but Holmes helped him upright gently. Enough, my good fellow. You have done no wrong. He turned to Lestrade. Send your men for Godfrey Hales at once. If I am not mistaken, he will attempt his flight before dawn. Holmes's gaze lingered on the floor, where faint, muddy prints led toward a second door half hidden by crates. He used this passage to slip in and out unnoticed, clever but not clever enough. The snow may have hidden his entrance, yet it will betray his departure. As he spoke, the church bells tolled, midnight Christmas morning, and somewhere beyond the frosted windows, the faint echo of footsteps faded into the cold London night. The snow outside had ceased entirely now, leaving the night eerily still. The moon hung over the Bainbridge estate like a cold, unblinking eye, and the only sound within the great house was the echo of our boots as Holmes led the way from the cellar into the corridor above. Corbin, pale and trembling, clutched my arm for balance, while Lestrade barked orders to his men to search the grounds for any trace of Godfrey Hales. Holmes, however, moved swiftly and silently, his lantern sweeping over the walls, as though the shadows themselves might confess the truth. Watson, he murmured, observe how our friend Corbin's tale confirms every suspicion. He was summoned by deceit, stunned into silence, and imprisoned below all to create the illusion of flight. But mark this, our culprit is not merely cunning. He is theatrical. The disappearing footprints, the midnight hour, the snow, they all serve a purpose beyond concealment. They are symbolic, almost ritualistic. Symbolic of what? I asked. Holmes paused by a window, his gaze fixed upon the silvered landscape beyond. Vengeance, perhaps, or inheritance, the son of a disgraced officer, wronged by the father of his. Betrothed, such a man might devise an elaborate masquerade to settle a score, all while casting himself as victim or hero. He turned suddenly, his eyes alight. And yet, there is one element unaccounted for the motive's anchor. What precisely did Hales hope to gain by this deception? Before I could answer, the heavy thud of boots approached. Lestrade's voice rang from the hall. My men found fresh tracks along the eastern hedge headed toward the lane. Holmes's composure did not falter. Ah, predictably impulsive. A guilty conscience is a poor navigator. Come, Watson. Bring your revolver once more. I fancy we shall find our man before the hour turns 1. We hurried through the front doors and into the freezing air. The lantern light flickered across the snow, revealing 2 distinct sets of prints, one large and hurried, the other smaller and lighter. As if made by someone running ahead, Holmes crouched over them, studying the impressions. Note the stagger here, Watson. He carries something weight across his left shoulder, likely a satchel or box. Our Mr. Hales is not merely escaping, he is absconding with property. Stolen? Undoubtedly. The question is what? The trail led us down a sloping lane toward the frozen pond at the edge of the Bainbridge grounds. There, under the pale shimmer of the moonlight, we spotted a solitary figure attempting to lift a wooden crate onto a small sleigh. Holmes moved like lightning. "Halt, Mr. Hales." The man spun around, his face ghostly in the light. For a moment he seemed torn between flight and surrender, but Holmes advanced with such precision that escape was impossible. Lestrade's constables surrounded him within seconds. "What's this, then?" Lestrade demanded, kicking the crate open. Inside lay bundles of sealed documents, yellowed with age, alongside a handful of small leather pouches. The colonel, who had followed close behind, gasped. "By heaven, those are my papers, reports from India sealed after the campaign. They were locked in my private chest." Hales's expression hardened. "Your chest, perhaps, Colonel. But they tell my father's story, the truth you buried under your fine uniform. You condemned him to disgrace and poverty while you lived as a hero. I meant only to reclaim his honor and my future with Clara." Holmes's tone was almost gentle, a noble motive poisoned by ignoble means. "You would have made your point better without theft or attempted abduction." Hales's eyes flashed. "You speak of justice, Holmes, but you serve men like him. You preserve appearances." "I sought the truth." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Truth may be pursued, Mr. Hales, but not counterfeited. You faked the footprints, disguised yourself as the servant, and staged a disappearance to mask your intrusion. In doing so, you ensured your own ruin." Lestrade stepped forward, snapping a pair of cuffs onto the man's wrists. "That'll do for now. You can tell your tale to the magistrate." As Hales was led away, Holmes bent to close the crate. "Curious, is it not, Watson?" he said quietly. "How the ghosts of one generation find form in the vengeance of the next. It is Christmas morning, and yet, for some, no peace descends." I watched the moonlight glint upon the frozen pond and felt the truth of his words. The case, though solved, carried a melancholy weight, one born not of mystery, but of human folly. Holmes replaced his hat, the faintest smile on his lips. "Come, my dear fellow. I suspect Mrs. Hudson has a pot of tea awaiting our return. Let us leave these vanishing footsteps behind us, though I dare say their echo will linger a while yet." The chill of dawn began to creep over the Bainbridge estate, its pale light washing across the snow-covered grounds as constables moved about like dark silhouettes, finishing their work. Holmes stood a little apart from the commotion, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed not on the arrested man or the recovered documents, but upon the snow itself, as though the white silence might yet whisper some last secret. I approached him quietly, reluctant to break his thoughts. "You seem unsatisfied, Holmes," I said. "Surely the case is concluded. The motive, the deception, the disappearance, all made plain." Holmes gave a faint, distracted smile. "Concluded, perhaps, but not complete. There is a difference, my dear Watson. The visible chain of events may be secured, but I sense one final link unseen, but vital to the full picture." He turned, his eyes keen even in the dim light. "Consider, Watson, why Hales risked such theatrics when a simple theft would have sufficed. Why the footprints, the masquerade, the letter to lure Corbin out? No man expends such ingenuity without a deeper cause. Before I could reply, Lestrade joined us, rubbing his hands briskly. We've got Hales locked in the coach, and he's calmer now. Says he'll speak with you, Mr. Holmes, but only once before he's taken to Scotland Yard. I imagine he knows the game's up. Holmes's expression sharpened. Then we shall oblige him. A confession at sunrise has a peculiar clarity to it. Inside the library, the fire had dwindled to embers. Hales sat in an armchair, his wrists still bound, his features pale but composed. The faint traces of snow in his hair caught the first rays of light filtering through the frosted window panes. Holmes regarded him in silence for several seconds before speaking. "You had every opportunity to take the documents quietly," Holmes began. "Yet you chose a method designed to mystify and delay discovery. I can only conclude your goal was not theft alone." Hales gave a mirthless laugh. "You read me well, Holmes. I never intended to sell those papers. They were my proof evidence that Colonel Bainbridge falsified the official report, and that ruined my father. I meant to reveal them publicly on Christmas morning, before all society, so that his name would wear the shame that ours bore for decades." Holmes's voice remained even. "Then why the subterfuge with the footprints?" Hales's eyes flashed. "Because I needed time. The household would have raised the alarm at once had they seen me leave. The false disappearance sent every man searching the snow while I worked below. I had planned to vanish by dawn, leaving only mystery behind. I could not help but feel a pang of pity as I listened. He spoke not with malice, but with the bitterness of long-nursed injury. Holmes studied him, his gaze unreadable. "And Miss Bainbridge?" he asked quietly. Hales's voice softened. "She knew nothing. I loved her, Holmes. I meant to tell her the truth after I'd set things right, but when I saw her tonight, sitting beside that man she calls father, I hesitated. I nearly abandoned it all. Then fate, your arrival, forced my hand." Holmes turned away, pacing slowly before the window. "You might have won justice through honesty. Instead, you chose the path of deceit and spectacle. In that, you proved no wiser than the man you sought to condemn." He paused, then added, almost gently, "Still, I cannot deny your courage or your loyalty to the memory of your father." Hales looked up, surprised by the note of compassion in Holmes's tone. "You understand me, then?" "I understand human weakness," Holmes replied. "It is the one constant in every equation." Lestrade signaled to his men, and they led Hales away. The faint crunch of their steps faded down the corridor, leaving the room heavy with the lingering scent of smoke and snow. Holmes remained at the window long after the carriage departed. "There is poetry in justice, Watson," he said at last, "though it is seldom kind. A son's vengeance, a father's sin, both lost in the same winter storm." He turned toward me, his expression weary but satisfied. "Come, my friend, let us return to Baker Street. I should like, for once, to welcome Christmas with silence rather than deduction." And as we stepped into the morning, the first light of Christmas Day breaking over the rooftops of London, I thought how, even in triumph, Sherlock Holmes carried the quiet sorrow of one who understood too deeply the frailty of the human heart. The road back to Baker Street was long and silent. The carriage wheels creaked over the frozen cobbles, and the faint orange glow of the street lamps glimmered like dying embers through the mist. Holmes sat across from me, his hat drawn low, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Though the case was solved and Hales in custody, I sensed his mind was still at work, turning over some unseen fragment that refused to settle. "Holmes," I said at last, "you have that look again, the one that tells me the story has not yet reached its end." He lifted his gaze slowly, his eyes distant. "You observe correctly, my dear Watson. There are two types of conclusion, legal and logical. The former satisfies the courts, the latter, the mind. Tonight we achieved the first, but I am not convinced of the second." "What troubles you?" Holmes's voice dropped low. "Corbin's account. There is a peculiarity I cannot dismiss. He claimed that Hales lured him with a message concerning his master's past, Yet how did Hales know precisely where to strike? The cellar door, the timing, the very routine of the house, it all required an intimacy that no outsider could possess. You suspect an accomplice? He nodded once. Indeed, a silent hand guiding the play from behind the curtain, and such a hand would not act without motive. The carriage rattled on, and I found myself thinking of Miss Clara Bainbridge, the way she had looked when we spoke, her composure too calm for a woman whose household had been thrown into chaos. I said as much to Holmes. He gave a slight smile. You surprise me, Watson. You touch the very nerve of my suspicion. Emotion, when repressed, leaves its trace as surely as a footprint in snow. Miss Bainbridge's demeanor was studied, not natural. I intend to confirm a theory before we close the book on this affair. We reached Baker Street near 7:30. The fog had thickened, clinging to the windows like damp gauze. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Back from another adventure, Mr. Holmes? You've missed your supper entirely. Holmes brushed past her gently. Forgive me, Mrs. Hudson. A pot of coffee, if you please, and Watson, if you'll indulge me, I require your company a little longer. I followed him to the sitting room, where he went directly to his desk and began leafing through a small stack of correspondence. From the middle, he withdrew a single sheet and handed it to me. It was a telegram, dated 2 days prior, addressed to Holmes from an unknown sender. Request private counsel regarding matter of inheritance and deceit. Must be handled discreetly. Signed, C.B. Clara Bainbridge. I breathed. Holmes nodded grimly. Received on the 23rd, but no meeting followed. I thought it mere coincidence when the Colonel's summons arrived the next day, but now I see the pattern. She knew something, Watson, and when her scheme with Hales unraveled, she feigned ignorance. Then, she helped him? I asked incredulously. Not directly, perhaps, but she may have enabled him, perhaps by providing access or information he could not otherwise obtain. Holmes lit his pipe, the flame illuminating his sharp features. It would explain her calmness. She expected Hales to fail, but counted on his failure to preserve her secret. A daughter's loyalty to her father, conflicting with her love for the man who sought to ruin him, an impossible dilemma. I stared at him. You mean, she orchestrated events so that neither man would triumph? Holmes exhaled a thin cloud of smoke. Precisely. The perfect stalemate. The father's papers recovered, the suitor disgraced, but her own part forever veiled beneath sorrow. A clever compromise, though one that leaves a bitter taste. He rose and drew back the curtains, gazing out into the fog-shrouded street where the first faint bells of morning service drifted from James's. Do you see, Watson? The vanishing footsteps were not merely Corbin's mystery, nor Hales's deceit, they were hers. She ensured that every trace of her involvement would disappear as neatly as footprints erased by falling snow. I sat in silence, the weight of his deduction settling heavily upon me. Will you expose her? Holmes turned, his expression unreadable. No. There is no justice in wounding a heart already divided by loyalty and loss. The law has its culprit. Let conscience judge the rest. He returned to his chair, the lamplight flickering across his face. It is Christmas, Watson. Even the sharpest truths deserve mercy in such an hour. And so we sat together in the quiet glow of the fire, the sound of distant bells mingling with the sigh of the winter wind, as Sherlock Holmes closed his eyes not in rest, but in thought while outside. London awoke to the pale dawn of Christmas Day. The faint chiming of distant church bells drifted through the fog, mingling with the muted crackle of the fire as morning settled fully upon Baker Street. Holmes sat unmoving in his chair, the pipe between his fingers long extinguished, yet the smoke still clung faintly to the air like a whisper of thought unfinished. I had grown used to these silences, those moments when his mind, razor-sharp and tireless, dissected the human condition as deftly as it did a clue. But that morning, there was something different in his stillness. It was not calculation alone that occupied him, it was contemplation. After some minutes, I spoke softly. Holmes, if Miss Bainbridge truly contrived to protect her father and ruin her suitor in a single stroke, then we have before us a tragedy of extraordinary design. He stirred slightly, his eyes opening with their usual quick alertness. Yes, Watson, a tragedy dressed in the garments of justice. Consider how elegantly the threads intertwine. A daughter's silence conceals her father's dishonor. A lover's ambition unmasks it. Between them lies the perfect crime, one that leaves no corpse, no theft, no trace. Merely a man broken, a woman weeping, and a house restored to peace. Society applauds, and truth slips quietly beneath the snow. I leaned forward, troubled by the cool precision of his tone. But surely, Holmes, even you must feel that such concealment is unjust. If Colonel Bainbridge falsified those reports in India, his honor rests on falsehood. Holmes smiled faintly. My dear Watson, justice and truth are rarely companions. The law concerns itself with acts, not motives. The daughter acts to preserve her father's honor. The suitor acts to avenge his father's disgrace. Each believes himself righteous. Which, then, is guilty? He rose suddenly, crossing to the window where the pale daylight reflected against the glass. There are crimes of the heart, Watson, crimes the courts cannot see, and yet which leave deeper wounds than any dagger. Miss Bainbridge's deception was one such act, and I fear, before the year ends, it may yet return to haunt her. I frowned. You think the matter unfinished? Holmes's reflection wavered in the misted pain. Unfinished, certainly. You forget, my friend, that we saw no proof of her direct hand, only inference. I would be remiss to rest on inference alone. He turned sharply. Fetch me the morning edition of the Times, if you please. I have a feeling the world outside our door has not remained idle. I did as asked, unfolding the newspaper across the table. The front page bore the usual holiday pleasantries and a column on the Queen's Christmas message, but a smaller item on the second page caught Holmes's eye. He took it from me without a word. "Ha!" he exclaimed softly, tapping the paper. "Listen, Watson, early this morning, a prisoner en route to Scotland Yard escaped custody after a collision on the Hampstead Road. The fugitive, identified as Mr. Godfrey Hales, remains at large. Authorities believe he fled on foot toward the northern outskirts of the city. I felt a chill despite the fire. He escaped? But the man was bound and guarded." Holmes's voice was calm, though his eyes gleamed with renewed fire. "A man driven by purpose, Watson, can defy any restraint, and I believe his purpose remains unchanged. He will return to Hampstead not for the papers, which he has lost, but for the woman who betrayed him." Without hesitation, he donned his coat and scarf. "Quickly now. If my calculations are correct, we have perhaps 2 hours before the storm breaks anew." Within the hour, we were once again bound for the Bainbridge estate. The snow had crusted overnight into a brittle sheet that crunched underfoot, and the sky hung heavy with grey clouds that promised more to come. The road was nearly deserted, save for the occasional milk cart or weary pedestrian. As the carriage rattled northward, Holmes remained silent, his gaze fixed beyond the window, his mind clearly racing ahead to the scene that awaited us. When at last we arrived, the gates stood open, and a solitary figure was pacing before them, Colonel Bainbridge himself. His face was drawn and ashen, and when he saw us step down from the carriage, he hurried forward with visible relief. "Mr. Holmes, thank heaven you've come. There's been another disturbance, terrible news. My daughter Clara is missing." Holmes's features tightened, but he did not flinch. "Since when?" "She went walking. Early this morning, just after dawn. Said she wished to be alone. The servants thought nothing of it, but when she did not return, we searched the grounds. Near the yew gate we found this." He handed Holmes a small scrap of paper, damp and crumpled from the snow. Holmes read it aloud. "There can be no peace built upon deceit. Come to where truth first vanished." It was unsigned. "Written by Hales," Holmes said softly. The phrase refers to the night of his disappearance, the U-gate where the footprints ended. Watson, we are dealing now not with cunning, but with desperation. Come, every minute counts. We followed the colonel through the white expanse of his grounds, past the frost-laden hedges and the frozen pond, until the outline of the yew trees rose ahead, black against the pale sky. Holmes halted suddenly, crouched low, and brushed his gloved hand over the snow. There, footprints. 2 sets. One light, one heavy. They lead toward the lake. The colonel uttered a cry and ran forward, but Holmes caught his arm sharply. No, stay back. The ice is thin. He dropped to one knee, inspecting the surface. A large section had cracked inward, the edges dark with water and shards of frozen slush. Nearby, something pale caught the light. A woman's glove, sodden and limp. Holmes's jaw clenched. Watson, bring the lantern. We knelt beside the hole, peering into the black water below. It reflected nothing but the shifting sky. And yet, beneath the surface, a faint shape wavered in the depths, motionless. The colonel fell to his knees, his voice breaking. "My God, my daughter!" Holmes said nothing. He removed his coat and plunged his arm into the icy water, his teeth gritting with the shock. After a desperate struggle, he withdrew a sodden scrap of fabric, part of a cloak and something else. A small, leather-bound notebook tied with a ribbon. He handed it to me silently, his breath sharp in the cold air. "She sought to bury," he murmured. It seems she met it at last. As the colonel called for help, Holmes stood staring into the water, the wind tugging at his coat, his expression unreadable. When I placed a hand on his shoulder, he spoke in a voice low and distant. "Even now, Watson, the footprints vanish once more. Only this time, they lead not into snow but into silence." For several long seconds no one moved. The only sound was the soft groan of ice as it shifted beneath the weight of the wind, and the colonel's broken breathing as he clutched at the edge of the lake, calling his daughter's name into the emptiness. Holmes remained still, his eyes fixed on the dark water. Then, with a sudden precision that startled even me, he straightened and spoke sharply to the nearest constable. "Ropes now. 2 of you fetch planks from the gardener's shed. We'll need them to distribute the weight." His tone left no room for argument. As the men rushed to obey, I saw in him that peculiar transformation that always occurred when emotion threatened to intrude. The tremor that had touched his hand moments before vanished. His features grew taut, his movements measured. "We will not assume the worst," he said quietly to me, "until we have evidence. The shape beneath the ice may not be what it seems." Working quickly, we stretched planks across the fragile surface and tied a rope about Holmes's waist. Against all protest, he moved forward himself, crawling on hands and knees toward the broken section. The ice cracked ominously beneath him, but he pressed on, inch by inch, until he reached the jagged rim. Then, plunging both arms into the freezing water, he groped through the blackness. There was a tense silence. Finally, he shouted, "Hold the rope firm!" And with a heave that drew gasps from us all, he dragged something upward, an arm pale as wax, then a body limp and sodden. Together we pulled him and his burden to safety. It was Clara Bainbridge. Her hair clung to her face in dark strands, her lips blue, her eyes closed. The colonel collapsed beside her, his cry echoing across the white expanse like a wound-given sound. I knelt instantly, feeling for a pulse. "They're faint but present." "She lives," I exclaimed. Quickly, blankets, brandy, warmth. Holmes gave brief, precise orders. Within minutes we had carried her to the house, laid her before the drawing-room fire, and wrapped her in thick quilts. The colonel hovered helplessly, whispering her name again and again, while I worked to restore her breathing. At last, she stirred a faint tremor of the eyelids, a gasp, then a whisper so soft I had to bend close to hear. He saved me." Holmes knelt beside her, his face unreadable. "Who, Miss Bainbridge? Do you mean Hales?" Her gaze fluttered to his, unfocused but determined. He pulled me from the edge. I slipped, tried to speak with him, but the ice gave way beneath us. He pushed me upward. She shuddered violently, and I motioned for silence. Holmes nodded, rising to his feet. Outside, Lestrade entered, his boots dripping snow. "We found him, Holmes, about 100 yards downriver. The current carried him beneath the thinner ice." "He's gone." Holmes closed his eyes briefly. "Then the circle is complete," he murmured. Lestrade frowned. "What circle?" "The one drawn by guilt and love," Holmes replied softly. "He came not to harm her but to confront her, to seek truth, perhaps forgiveness. And when both eluded him, he gave the only answer he knew." He turned toward the fire, watching the flames dance across Clara's still form. In the end, he vanished, as he began leaving only footsteps that ended too soon. When Miss Bainbridge could speak again, she asked for Holmes privately. I withdrew to give them space, but remained close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. Her voice trembled. "You know, don't you, that I lied?" "Yes," Holmes said gently, "but not out of malice. You sought to protect both men, to save your father's name and the man you loved. You played a perilous game, Miss Bainbridge, and in doing so, you nearly lost everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought if I destroyed the papers, the past would die with them. But Godfrey knew. He said truth cannot drown, no matter how deep we bury it. And he was right. It found us both tonight." Holmes's voice softened. "Truth is a tide, Miss Bainbridge. It recedes, but it never vanishes." She turned toward him, her voice breaking. "Will you tell the police?" He regarded her in silence for a moment before replying. "No, there has been enough suffering. The law has its verdict already, and the world will believe the story it prefers a servant's deceit. A jealous lover, a daughter rescued. Let it rest there." Her tears fell freely now. "And you, Mr. Holmes? What will you think of me?" "I think," he said quietly, "that you loved unwisely, but not unjustly, and that you will carry the weight of this night longer than any punishment could demand. That is sentence enough." When he rejoined me in the corridor, I saw in his face that rare expression, neither triumph nor pride, but a deep, weary compassion. "Watson," he said, "do you recall what I once told you, that the most difficult crimes to solve are those committed not by evil but by love? Tonight we have seen that proven beyond measure." By evening, the storm had begun again. Snow fell softly against the windows, erasing the footprints that had scarred the ground since Christmas Eve. Clara Bainbridge remained under her father's care, weak but alive. Holmes declined the colonel's gratitude and refused all reward. As we departed, he paused once at the gate, glancing back toward the house. "Strange," he murmured. "How peace can look so like sorrow when seen from a distance." We rode back to Baker Street through the muffled quiet of falling snow. For a long time, neither of us spoke. At last I said, "It is a melancholy ending, Holmes." He shook his head slightly. "No, Watson, merely a human one. The footprints have vanished, yes, but not the lesson they leave behind. Even in deceit there may dwell devotion, and in justice, cruelty. The world seldom grants us purity, only balance." He leaned back, his profile etched against the frosted glass. "Remember this night, my friend. For all its shadows, it was a case worth the telling." As the carriage rolled onward through the sleeping streets, I looked once more at my companion, the man who had unmasked princes and pickpockets alike, and thought, not for the first time, that beneath his iron logic there lived a heart far more merciful than he ever cared to admit. And as the gaslights faded behind us, and the city gave way to silence, I realized that the vanishing footsteps of that Christmas Eve would echo in both our minds for many years to come. Snow fell through the small hours. We reached Baker Street late. Mrs. Hudson pressed coffee upon us, while Holmes set the leather notebook on the table, its ribbon stiff from the lake's chill. "You will open it then?" I asked. "In the morning," he said, though he did not move. "Sleep, Watson. Thoughts have tides. They break best in silence." I slept uneasily and rose to find him as I had left him, spare and straight as a rapier, the ash of 2 pipes cooling in the tray. Holmes lifted the ribbon and untied it. On the first page, in a steady feminine hand, stood Clara Bainbridge's name and the date. Beneath, in smaller script, "These notes are for the day I can no longer bear the cost of silence." The pages that followed were a ledger of conscience, her father's night terrors, fragments of overheard talk, an inventory of the locked chest, and a careful copy of a paragraph from the Indian report, followed by the same paragraph, altered names displaced, a date shifted, responsibility mislaid. "See here, Watson. Even an untrained eye might catch it." Then the Colonel, "Yes." He shut the book with quiet finality. Clara knew. She took the notebook to the lake to barter with Hales, her confession for his restraint. He gave his life to save hers, and she must carry that bargain until her hair is white. "What will you do with it?" "Return it," he said. "Not to the Colonel, to the daughter. She alone has earned its burden." Near noon, Lestrade arrived, chilled by weather and eager for tidy endings. The inquest, he reported, was swift. Accidental death by misadventure. The escaped prisoner drowned in flight. The household exonerated. "The papers will lap it up," he added. "Christmas sorrow, brave rescue, grieving father, neat as a parcel." "It is not our office to untie every ribbon," Holmes said, "only those that conceal a blade." After he left, we drove again to Hampstead. The world had thrown a white scarf over its griefs. The ewes wore it like mourning. Clara received us in a small morning room that overlooked the lake. She was pale, yet composed in that grave way of those who have stood at the edge and returned. Holmes placed the notebook upon the table and stepped back. "It is yours," he said. She did not touch it at first. "You read it?" "I did." "Then you know." "I know enough," he answered. "More would be cruelty." "My father begs to thank you." "Permit him to thank Inspector Lestrade," Holmes replied. "And you, Mr. Holmes? What do I owe you?" "Nothing. I would have accepted payment to abandon the case. I cannot accept it for finishing." When we took our leave, the Colonel met us in the hall, upright as parade. He spoke brave words. Holmes regarded him a long, grave moment and said only, "Good day, sir." Later, in the cab, he watched fields where snow had begun to heal the scars of boots and runners. "There is the world's wisdom, Watson," he murmured. "What cannot be pardoned may be covered." Back at Baker Street, dusk gathered early. Holmes played the violin softly. When he set the instrument aside, the old mocking light returned to his eyes. "You have questions," he said. "Only one. Would you have exposed the Colonel if the girl had not stood between?" He considered. "Some truths cut to cure, and some only flay. I am not surgeon to the world. At best I diagnose. I prescribe where I can. Where I cannot, I advise rest and warmth." He smiled, cruel and kind together. "And Mrs. Hudson's coffee." Evening brought carols and late cabs. A boy arrived with a small parcel in brown paper. Inside lay a single glove, dried and mended, and a card in Clara's hand. "For the hand that held when the ice gave way." Holmes placed the glove in the drawer that holds his oddest trophies, an ivory domino, a clay pipe, a foreign coin bent by a bullet. "Add it to the index, Watson," he said lightly. "What title?" He looked toward the window, where snow fell and the city breathed like a sleeping titan. "Call it The Case of the Vanishing Footsteps and the Footprints That Remained." I wrote the title and sat a while, listening to the city's muffled hum. Holmes drew the curtains and stirred the fire. "You see," he said, "why I dislike miracles. There is always a hand behind them, and it is almost never divine. And Miss Bainbridge? She will grow old kindly," he said, "and very tired. That is punishment enough, and perhaps absolution too. We sat with our cups while the flames settled into coals, and the snow made quiet corrections upon the streets. Somewhere a clock struck 9. Holmes leaned back, a small smile touching his mouth. "Another case, Holmes?" I ventured. "Another snowfall," he answered. "The case can wait. Tonight, London is improved." So the matter ended not in triumph, but in proportion. In the morning the city would wake to clean pavements, and few would remember where the trail had turned. But I would remember, and when in years to come I heard bells on a cold Christmas night, I would think of a lake under grey sky, a hand thrust into black water, and the quiet voice that refused to call itself justice.